coming, it's coming. Just wait. It'll be all good. Well, you don't even have to pretend. I am a layman. Like, I am a layman. Like, if you looked up layman in the dictionary, I'd be like, look, there's Joe's picture. In 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Toronto Dogcast. Here with me today is Karen, and I'm so excited to have you on. Thanks so much for joining me today. We're going to talk about dog nutrition. Karen, you are an expert in dog nutrition. You're a certified dog nutritionist. Is that correct?
I've taken a lot of courses. There's not really a specific path to certification.
Okay.
So I call myself a pet nutrition expert.
Pet nutrition expert. There you go. I didn't even know that existed. You know a lot about pet nutrition and specifically dog nutrition, right?
Dog and cat nutrition for sure.
This is a dog cast.
This is a dog cast.
Not a cat cast. Not that we're against cats. I love cats. I used to have a cat. Cats are awesome. But this is a podcast for dog lovers. So we're going to talk about a lot of cool stuff today, but you wanted to start off with genetics and the environment. That's a very interesting thing because normally you don't think of genetics when you think about food.
My favorite quote is an Ayurvedic proverb, and the proverb goes like this. When diet is wrong, medicine is of no use, and when diet is right, medicine is of no need. That is the fundamental philosophy behind nutrition, I just believe so passionately in that statement. So
yeah, and that really is an eloquent way of expressing what nutrition means to a dog, or what it can mean to a dog.
Right. Because
if you have a really good nutritional regimen, then your dog is much more likely to be healthy and happy and the rest of it. So obviously there's a lot more to a dog's health other than nutrition, but as people, we obsess over our diets and what we eat and organic this, that, and the rest of it.
Or sometimes we don't. Sometimes we learn about our own nutrition from helping our dogs.
Exactly.
And sometimes we learn about their nutrition from helping ourselves and changes we make to diet. So lots of people, it goes both ways, and a lot of the basics of nutrition, even though we are talking about dogs specifically, the nutrition fundamentals, philosophies are shared. We share them.
Absolutely. And one of the pillars of this podcast is this concept of what can we learn from our dogs? Right? Because dogs are such an important part of our lives. That there's lessons that they can teach us that will benefit us immensely.
I think dogs are great teachers. I think animals are great teachers. I think that, as humans, we have a lot to learn from them, and they have a lot to teach us. So for sure. Absolutely.
And we even touched on that in the last podcast when I spoke with Jen. So if you haven't checked out that podcast on social media, it's great. Go check it out. But yeah, we were talking about that a lot. And so there's this concept of dogs teaching us and us learning from our dogs. So let's examine this concept of genetics and environment and nutrition.
So health and wellness is, what we're here to talk about today. That's what nutrition leads to. So the two biggest components for health and wellness are genetics and the environment.
Okay.
And so, genetics, I've got a couple of anecdotes to tell you that DNA is not destiny.
Right.
And, a lot of us think, I'm predisposed to this or I'm predisposed to that. That is just what it is. Well, if you know that you're predisposed to something, there's things that you can do to combat that. And a lot of those things start with diet. Diet and exercise are the two fundamentals of what comprise our good health and our happiness and our well-being. Eliminate or at least reduce processed food in your diet.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot, and And the dog world is full of processed food.
Full of processed food, and maybe a statistic that a lot of people don't know. Dogs are the most predisposed being on the planet to cancer. There is a 50% chance your dog will get cancer. That's huge.
So just the average dog?
Just the average dog.
Not like a purebred something or other?
No, 1 in 2 chance that
Any
our dogs will succumb to cancer.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that it was that high.
A really high number. So when you know that genetically they're already predisposed, there's a little bit maybe of a weakness or a DNA component to it. What can we do to try and eliminate some of the things that might be contributing to that condition? And of course, food is always the first medicine. So food is something to take a look at.
Yeah, I tell people all the time that everything with dogs is magnified because their lives are so much shorter than ours, right? So if you think of the analogy that every human year is 7 dog years, I think that might be like an old archaic myth or whatever, but the basic premise is the same in that everything is much shorter for your dog. They grow very fast.
Uh-huh.
They come out as puppies one day, and then a couple months later, like, they're huge.
Mm-hmm.
And then next thing you know, at 1, they're full size. And, they live their life. And, old age for a dog, I mean, Mosley's almost 12. He's going to be 12 in December. And he's considered a senior dog. Like, he's outlived most of his friends from when he was a puppy. So everything that your dog experiences is magnified. So when you talk about diet, or you talk about exercise, or behavioral problems, or whatever the case may be, stress, all those things are magnified because their lives are so much more concentrated.
Yeah.
So if they have a bad diet, so if you and I have a bad diet, we have more time to fix those problems maybe,
sure.
or mitigate some of the ill effects, but dogs don't have that same opportunity because everything happens so much faster. Is that the case?
I love that you brought that up because
Okay.
I talk to people about that all the time because it's really true, and here's some real ways of understanding it. And I use that same 7-year rate as well.
Sure.
So 7 times faster for everything. But I want to preface that with another silly statistic.
Sure.
In the 1970s, when I was young, a dog used to live on average 17 years.
Really?
Do you know what the average is now?
Ooh, I would say about 10.
10 to 11 years. That's 40 years. That means in our lifetime, if that keeps going, that they could practically be extinct. That's a horrible, horrible thing to think about because of course, as dog lovers, that's just something that we've got to turn around, and we've got to look at all the things we're doing. Of course, food is a big part of it.
Yes.
But all the contributors to what's causing this to happen, and we've got to do things to change that and to stop that. And wouldn't it be great? I'd love to have a dog live to 17, 20 years. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's 2 components that I tell people all the time. There's the quantity of years that your dog has, which is obviously huge, but there's also the quality. Like, so how, I'm going to use Mosley again as an example, because Mosley's an old man. He's almost 12. The quality of his life at 12 is very close to the quality of life when he was 6. He still runs around, he still plays, he's not as quick, obviously, as he used to be, but he's still, enjoying a lot of the things that he used to enjoy when he was younger. And all that has to do with okay, well, he's not in pain and the rest of it. So he still has a high quality, and I think that's what you're getting at too, is diet has an impact on the quality of your dog's life. They have the energy, they have the right nutritional requirements so that they can deal with illnesses or possible diseases or colds or whatever the case may be.
All of us every day, I mean, that's what food is. Again, getting back to what food is. All of us every day, them, us, we all have a million things out there coming for us, and none of us knows what's going to get us.
What's happening?
So all you got to do is live as best you can with
Right.
the quality and the quality of diet, the quality of exercise, the quality that happiness. All those things all contribute to longevity and prosperity and wellness and all those kind of things. So
For sure. And to your point, don't think of things in terms of silos. Everything is connected.
Everything.
So whether you're talking about, let's say, exercise or how often you walk your dog or socializing your dog or what your dog eats, everything is connected. And if you take a more holistic approach to how you look at your dog, then you can step back and see the bigger picture to see, okay, where does diet, what role is diet playing in this other bigger picture, and how is it affecting other aspects of my dog's life? Is that?
That's exactly right. Just to take it a step back to the 7-year thing, I think that they, if they're doing well, if they're faring well, they because you've made a change, I think they get better almost instantly. It's miraculous how quickly small changes can turn things around for them.
Absolutely, yeah.
But also when they get sick, and unfortunately some of us who have had other dogs and they're no longer with us understand as well that they can get sick really quickly as well. So that's something always to keep in mind, that it can change just like that, and it happens that much quicker. So if you have a problem that you've been looking at for, a lump that's been there for 2 months, well, that's 2 months in our term, 8 weeks in our term time, which doesn't sound like very much. But multiply that by 7, and that's how long your dog has been living with that thing. And maybe it's time, think of it as that ratio of the number of months or weeks it's been times 7, and think, is that too long before I need to go to the vet? Is that too long before I need to do something about it? Because in our terms, 8 weeks isn't very long, maybe, but it is that much longer when it's 56 weeks. So.
Yeah. So everything is magnified.
Yeah, exponentially magnified. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say I'm the average dog lover, and I have a dog, and I walk into your store, and I'm interested in. There's so much. I mean, the average person, including myself, is often overwhelmed. There's so many different choices. There's so many different foods. There's so many different brands. There's so many different price points. It's a bit much for the average person. So let's say, for example, I have 2 dogs, and I walk in and I say, okay, Karen, I really need you to help me to choose the best nutrition for my dog. Walk us through the process of what the average person should know to help them to choose the right food for their dog in the first place.
So the first myth I'd like to take you through,
right,
is that your dog can fare well, or your dogs can fare well eating the same thing day over day, year over year. There is no such thing as the perfect food. It doesn't exist for them. It doesn't exist for us. If it did, we'd all be eating it, and we wouldn't have to, feed our children and feed ourselves. We'd just be eating that one thing and not be having this conversation. But it doesn't exist. What does exist is choice, and we're lucky, because of where we live, that we have availability. So bringing in a rotational diet, much like humans eat, for your pets is one of the first things you should do. So don't put all your faith in one brand or one product. Don't assume one group of people has it right and everybody else has it wrong. That's not true. So bring in a rotation and change that food. Try and feed at least 3 to 5 different things, and try and change it at least once a month. If you can change it more than that, change it more than that. That's just, your conventional food. There's things that you can do if you don't want to change the food. You can add things to the food to make it a little bit different and a little bit more wholesome. But there's bad things that, aside from the food not being perfect, And, you know, if you're eating one thing all the time, that's when you need to be a rocket scientist to figure out all the supplementation you would need to do to balance out that one kind of diet, because it's complicated.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're mixing it up and you're using some good sound wisdom to what you're doing to mix it up and incorporating other things in, chances are, you know, you're going to balance out the highs and the lows of what you're doing, and you're going to come out in a nice middle spot where, you know, you got your bases all covered, and you don't have to worry as much about, is the diet perfect? Because you're
right. So instead of focusing more on the perfect diet, what is the appropriate diet? Like what's going to fit my dog's needs? So those needs will change over time. Mm-hmm. So if somebody has a puppy, for example, and they're in a high growth phase, there's going to be different dietary requirements, nutritional requirements, because they're growing so quickly.
Right.
And then once they reach maturity and, you know, they're very active, there's going to be different requirements. And then obviously later in life.
Dogs are carnivores. So what they really, really need, the bulk of their diet should be, in my opinion, meat, bone, and organ. Those are the things that they would have in abundance.
Yeah, everything. It's very controversial. So yeah. I want to say right up front that these are our opinions. Mm-hmm. And you obviously have a lot of expertise, a tremendous amount of experience and wealth of knowledge. So that's going to be valuable. But for people out there listening to this or watching this, I just want to emphasize this is our opinions. This is our views on certain topics. If you don't agree, that's fine. If you want to do your own research, I always encourage people, take the information, take our opinions, this conversation with a grain of salt. We're just having an interesting talk. That's what a podcast is about, right?
Spark the discussion.
Exactly.
And let's figure it out and let's move it along and get better at this.
So do your own research.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you talk to 5 different people, you're going to get 5 different answers.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of people struggle, including myself, because because I work with dogs and I work with a lot of dog owners, they'll often ask me about diet. And I just turn to them and I say, I'm really sorry. I just don't have any expertise in that area. But if you really want a recommendation, this is what you could do. But yeah, if you go to your vet's going to say something different. Your neighbor's probably going to say something different. The dog food commercials are going to say something different. You know, if you go to a more artisan, like your butcher might say something different. But I think there's certain key standards that are consistent.
And you mentioned something that I would like to remind people of if they're not aware. Mm-hmm. Much like our GPs, our human GPs, vets do not learn nutrition in school. They get at most 30 minutes of nutrition, and it's presented by a kibble company. It is not a well-regarded or well-respected component of health. There's not a lot of conventional medical people who have that wisdom. So they know as little or as much as the average person.
See, that's interesting because myself included, I think a lot of people make a lot of assumptions about vets, including because they're pretty much the only professionals out there they go to school for, 6 years of university, I think, to become a vet, and it's very difficult. So people place a lot of value on a vet's opinion, but I think myself included assumed that a vet would have a lot of expertise in nutrition because that's a huge component of health. Is it not?
I think to me it is, and to me it's obvious, but in the Western world, we dismiss nutrition. So
if you're the average dog person, again, getting back to the original question, what kind of things should people consider? Age is going to be one of them. Mm-hmm. Lifestyle,
activity for sure. Age. So usually the you've touched on most of the key areas are puppies, probably have, unique needs.
Right.
High activity dogs have unique needs. Dogs that are sick have unique needs. A pregnant female has unique needs.
Okay.
A lactating female has unique needs. And elderly dogs have unique needs.
Okay. So to summarize, I think it would be best to say you need to look at your dog's nutritional requirements a lot, because it's a fluid thing and it changes depending on the time in their life, depending on their activity levels, and then depending on any circumstances that could influence their health. Age, I think, is probably one of the bigger ones. So they go through this phase when they're puppies, they get big really quickly, and then they get through adolescence and adulthood, and then when they become senior dogs, it's a different story. So 3 main kind of stages. Let's tackle the elephant in the room.
Okay.
You ready for this?
I'm ready.
A lot of controversy, a lot of heated debate, a lot of people spewing terrible things at each other, all over this issue of kibble versus raw food. So we have to address it. I'm not going to have a dog nutritionist on the podcast without. We don't want to dwell on it, right? Mm-hmm. We don't want to get into to make it all about this thing, but we want to address it, and we want to go through it in a way that is as informative as possible. So make up your own freaking minds out there, people. Don't point the hate at us. We're going to present you with our opinions, our information. Debate all you want, but do the right thing for your own dog, and don't worry about what other people do with their dogs, right? So what works for your dog, great, fantastic, that's lovely. And I think what people get into is this mentality of, I have to be right. So if I'm spending, all this money on this raw food, I have to be right. And then if you're not doing the same as me, that means that you're wrong. And that's just not the thing. And I really want people to understand one of the purposes of this podcast is to bring people together instead of people butting heads all the time and getting into arguments over stupid things that don't matter. So not to say that nutrition doesn't matter, but in terms of what other people do with their dogs isn't relevant to what you do with your own dog.
And I'm here to share my opinions, and I will share my opinions gladly with anybody. And you know what? At the end of the day, no one knows our dogs better than we know our dogs.
Sure.
And we love our dogs and care about our dogs so much that we will always make the right decision, whatever that decision is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's going to be benefits and drawbacks to both.
Absolutely.
So it's about weighing the options and choosing the right option for your personal situation and for your dog. How recent or not recent is raw food? Because I know it's very popular and it's very much on trend, and it used to be quite rare, and now it's very common.
Raw food is what they would have mostly eaten for hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it wasn't until probably around the turn of the century, there's a veterinarian who came up with making it like cereal. So cereal used to be the breakfast thing of choice. It's, taken some slams, human cereal I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to make it convenient. And I guess that probably would have coincided with people becoming more urban, leaving farms, moving into cities for work and life, and bringing their pets with them. It's more, it's easier to have something that, fits in the pantry or fits in your cupboard, doesn't need to take up refrigerator space if they even had refrigerators back then. So he was just trying to make something that was accessible to people. So he thought about making it like cereal, like in little kibble form.
Right.
The problem with it is that it's, one of the problems with it is it's very dry and very dehydrating. So you might notice if you're feeding kibble that your dog drinks a lot of water.
Yeah. And it expands in their stomach.
And it expands in their stomach, and then you might be dealing with
a
horrible situation
sometimes.
like, well, or worse, a bloat or a flip stomach, and those are pretty dire situations to deal with if that happens.
Okay.
So that's one of the problems for sure. But the other problem that we don't think about, and I try to liken it back to what would be logical.
So moisture content is one of the biggest differences between raw and kibble.
Right.
Perishability is a huge one.
Well, that's a funny one because food should attract at a certain point in time, should disintegrate, and should at a certain point in time
it should be
bacteria.
perishable.
Should be perishable.
Yeah, and if it isn't, it's full of preservatives.
Right. And so kibble doesn't ever perish. So, you know, it will last for years and years and years and years. And you know what? If it's not attractive to bacteria, it's probably not a healthy choice. It's just, so, you know, those are funny little stories. But aside from that, it's not live food. There's no live digestive enzymes in there. It's not doing what it needs to do in your dog's body. That's why your dog needs all that water to help it do its job and break it down. And then there's, you know, what's in the food. But the long and the short of it is, kibble, for example, is put through a really intense heat process called extrusion. And we know that food loses nutrition at 120 degrees. The extrusion process is from 120 to 200 degrees. Mm-hmm. So we know no matter how good the ingredients are going into the kibble, that most of the nutrition is lost because of that process. Mm-hmm. So what happens at the end of the process is they have to put in a premix of synthetic and fractionated vitamins and minerals, mm-hmm. which are mostly from China, which, you know, we've had some food issues, especially with dog food issues in the past there. I think 80% of the foods have this premix from China. Mm-hmm. And then there's the whole theory out there that a lot of people in the natural health field are talking about, and that is, do fractionated and synthetic vitamins and minerals really help? Mm-hmm. Well, when you think about how vitamins and minerals operate in whole food, this is why we don't have to be rocket scientists, because whole food and Mother Nature have already figured out food. So
by whole food you mean a carrot?
I mean a carrot or an orange or a steak or an egg.
Something that is like, okay, this is a supplement for vitamin C.
Yeah, or someone, you know, I think a big part of the dog's diet is bone. I think it's the most important ingredient.
Right.
Some people will take the bone out of the diet because they don't have the equipment. They don't, you know, they'll put something else in to grind it. They don't have the equipment to grind it, so they'll put something else in. And as soon as we start doing that, it's no longer whole food. We're making choices it's becoming like processed food. We're making choices. Well, this is inconvenient, so I'm going to do this instead.
So we're just going through and looking at some of the differences between kibble and raw.
Right.
So there are super expensive kibbles out there. Like there are some ridiculously expensive kibbles with very exotic, and I'm sure there are on the raw food side as well, but you can buy kibble that has like duck meat, venison, salmon, all types of very exotic kind of ingredients. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to somebody the other day, and they're reading off the ingredients, and they said, "Oh, well, look, this has chicken byproducts in it." And I said, "Yeah, I don't know what that is, but if it is referring to anything that isn't like just the meat itself, so does raw." Mm-hmm. Because raw food contains ground up bones, organs, because it's necessary, heart, liver, kidney, like a whole bunch of stuff. So those are, I guess, considered byproducts as well. Like if you talk about it in the grand scheme of things, like it's not stuff that we would normally eat. When we go to get a chicken, we don't sit there and say, okay, I'm going to grind up unless you have haggis. Which
it's the waste. It's the waste from the human food industry, and it is the premise of what the commercial food industry is built on. So
Okay.
it's grains that haven't passed inspection. It's seafood that hasn't been inspected and can't be put into human consumption. There's also sick livestock, and there are euthanized animals that are all rendered together.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they go to, and this is not, there are for sure some good or better kibbles out there. I would argue that the form of it isn't as bioavailable as a real whole food diet, but I don't want to paint everybody with the same brush, but there's a lot more of this than we realize, of this questionable origination of the food. And then it's mixed into this big slurry where they add about 50% of filler, carbohydrate filler. They mix it all together, they put it through the extrusion process, and then they add that premix back in, and then they call it food.
Okay. So anything that you go to buy, whether you're talking about raw food, kibble, whatever, there's always going to be the good ones, and then there's the bad ones.
Sure.
And because of the growing popularity in raw food, I've seen raw food popping up everywhere from anyone who's got like a grinder, and
that's a good point.
Because they can charge a premium and say like, look, this is raw food, and then people just make that assumption, I'm buying raw food for my dog because it's raw food, therefore it's good.
Right.
And what you're saying is be very diligent in whether you're looking at kibble or raw food. Be diligent, because there's good ones out there, and then there's not so good ones.
There's, absolutely.
And you don't necessarily know what you're getting. I mean, I think one of the advantages of the kibble side is that it's a regulated industry, meaning like you have these multinational corporations that if they're creating substandard food that's hurting dogs, and I guess like your theory is that it does hurt dogs.
Well, yeah, I would say it does, but they're also self-regulating, and they're not obliged to meet AAFCO standards. So
I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit, okay? Because I want to make sure that this is as balanced as possible. What about the people out there who say, look, there's dogs out there that eat garbage.
Mm-hmm.
They're scavengers, which is true.
Yep.
And they're putting tons of God knows what. Maybe they're eating stuff that's gone bad. Maybe they're eating garbage. Maybe they're like, who knows what they're eating. I mean, look, dogs eat nasty stuff. Dogs eat their own feces sometimes, okay? This is not like and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But, I mean, dogs will eat, like, pretty nasty stuff.
They are scavengers. Yeah. For the most part. They hunted sometimes, but I believe they were mostly scavengers. So they will do well with scavenged food. They don't need like it fresh
prepared.
from the, and they don't need it fresh from the fridge, or you don't want to ever feed a dog a moldy thing. I'm not saying that that's the optimal diet, but that's a natural way for them to be. If
you go back to the origins of our relationship with dogs, that's I've watched a bunch of documentaries, and that's what they say. They say it's more than likely dogs were eating our garbage when we were uncivilized, human beings that would just toss our bones and whatever.
I saw the same documentary.
Did you really? Okay, so you know.
The cavemen.
Yeah, the
cavemen. And they think that
yeah.
man wouldn't exist if they hadn't figured out early on that dogs could help them hunt.
Yes.
So is this the one? They used the dogs to help them hunt.
They did.
And then when they caught it, they threw the bones to the dog and they ate the meat.
Yeah, and that's how the relationship got started. That's how the first dog approached human beings, because they were attracted to our garbage, essentially. Right. And then the relationship developed from there. Okay, so there's good and bad in kibble. There's good and bad in raw.
There will be, for sure, as this industry is growing. I've always known, the same things that motivated people to to perhaps do questionable things in a kibble diet will be the same people and the same operators, because we're humans, and there's people that operate on different platforms and with different values.
Standards.
Yeah, and different standards. So we will have to be vigilant if we are raw feeders and keep an eye and make sure that that the raw food that we're feeding doesn't go the way of kibble and with poor choices.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's because I do, because I've seen it. I met a lady who was pushing her own raw food, and I went to the place where she conducted her operations, let's say, and I was appalled of the conditions, but she was charging a mint for this raw food.
Yeah.
And it was all frozen, prepackaged in boxes, and it looked really nice, and it was in portions of, I don't know, whatever it is, half a pound or a pound.
Yeah.
And she was selling it like hotcakes, and people were buying it, and I was just like, I doubt this is high quality food. Okay, so let's talk more about this debate and get into some of the advantages and disadvantages. So one of the disadvantages, I think, with kibble is that it's not a one size fits all, but that's how they do it. Mm-hmm. So they have economies of scale. Mm-hmm. They have mega facilities, factories, so they can produce a product at a relatively low cost because they're industrialized.
They're corporate, and their motivation is doing it for as little, for making it as inexpensively as possible,
right,
for maximum profit. So that's their motivation.
So they're putting out, a diet and saying, okay, this has all your dog's dietary requirements, but it's the same across the country, across the world, and it's the same formula, and it's the same thing. And the reality is that might work for some dogs, but more than likely it's not going to work for dogs that have nutritional requirements beyond that.
Well, I still don't think it's optimal nutrition because it's dehydrated. It doesn't have the digestive enzymes and things that they need to utilize it. So I think that it's okay to feed it if you have to, but I think you probably want to add some real food. If you're feeding kibble, I think you would want to add some real food.
Okay.
And if you're feeding, if you're feeding, because we don't all have the time or the inclination to go the whole raw food, or we don't have the freezer space, or it's just too icky because we're vegetarians, whatever the reason is.
Yeah.
So there are things that we could do that aren't fully going the raw way, but still can help bring better nutrition.
Okay, that's great. So let's give the audience some recommendations. So let's say I know cost is an issue for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And so let's say somebody's on a relatively, tight budget. And I think one of the biggest obstacles to feeding raw, or that I've heard anyway, there's a couple big factors. First off is the cost. It's expensive.
I think that it shouldn't be. So what I like to think, and what I think is logical, is look at, if you're feeding chicken, look at what it costs if you eat chicken.
Yeah.
Look at what it costs you when you go to the grocery store. Mm-hmm. And if it costs you $2 a pound in the grocery store, or $1.50 a pound in the grocery store, you should not be paying $8 or $10 a pound to feed it to your dog. That's illogical. There's some.
It's way out of whack.
That's way out of whack. So you can feed a responsibly raw diet on a par with a kibble diet for sure. There's choices out there. Just be careful who you're getting your food from, where you're getting it from. But maybe cost isn't what's driving you. Maybe there's other things. But some of these whole food things are things that you could add.
So maybe that's a myth. Maybe that's a fallacy. So anything I'm giving you is just anecdotal mm-hmm. information based mm-hmm. on what people have told me. Mm-hmm. Cost is prohibitive. I know I was taking care of a dog that was on a raw food diet, and she ran out of food, meaning the food that the owner had given me for her dog to take care of her ran out. So I had to go out and buy some raw food for this dog, and it was ludicrously expensive to the point where I was a little bit taken back, because I was like, this is more than I spend on my own diet, let alone...
there's something really wrong with that equation, and
okay.
It shouldn't be like that. I happen to retail raw food.
So give us an idea.
I won't carry a brand that does that, because you have to really be able to justify. So I look at the quality of the meat. There's different qualities of meat. Is it intensively farmed, like a grocery store? That should be a cheaper product. Is it, or you use the Whole Foods model, so there's good, better, best.
Yeah.
Best is it's pasture raised. It's the farmed animal is fed species appropriately, and so it's getting what it needs. It's not jacked full of antibiotics and hormones. It's a healthy, happy farmed animal. Mm-hmm. That's the extreme, and that's the best. You should expect to pay more for that. That costs more.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
And then there's the in between, where there's people that are trying to do something maybe just to break that price point a little bit, and maybe it's not the cheapest, and maybe it's not the best, and there's the in between world.
Okay.
But grocery store meat is what most people eat. So grocery store meat, most people eat that intensively farmed, less expensive type product. Right. And that's and so they feel that if I'm eating it for myself, it's good enough for my dog, and that. Again, that price point should resonate with us if we're buying meat for ourselves. So if someone's charging you way too much.
Okay, so what is a reasonable amount of money? Like for, how do you gauge it? Like per pound, per day? How do you price out?
So how I usually, and it's hard for people to get their head around, because it's so different than kibble. When you're feeding the same thing day in, day out, you're feeding the exact same amount. You know that you spend $100 a month on kibble, and it is what it is. Right. In this way of thinking, and when you're thinking of diet, you're not feeding the same thing every day, day in and day out. You're feeding different things. So now it's making the math in your head a little crazy.
Yeah, it's more complicated.
It's more complicated. But you should be able to feed a 1 pound a day animal. So that's about a 50-pound dog who eats a pound a day. And so I'll just give you fractions of what it should cost, or what I think it should cost.
50-pound dog eats 1 pound a day?
1 pound a day.
I thought it was more than that.
No. Well, so there's another thing that I think that some people do. I'm pretty good at guessing a dog's weight, and I have discovered, even for my own crazy hyperactive dogs, that the calculation that's out there is probably a little bit more than they need. The best thing you can do for your dog is start with those guidelines, and it's a great place to start. Yeah. But you want to watch the dogs. I think it's really important, even though it's counterintuitive to a retail model that I sell raw food. I think it's really important that you keep them lean. I think that, at any age, whether they're a puppy, they should always be on the leaner side. You can get away with a little bit more fat in a puppy, but they really shouldn't be fat, cute little chubby puppies.
What about the winter time? Because I usually feed my dogs just a bit more in the wintertime because of the cold.
That's a really great point. And we, if you eat meat, what we tend to do in the wintertime is eat those kind of meats that are more warming, like a pork or a lamb, or those kind of things that have more fat and they're more satiating, and that's a really good idea, I think, even for dogs in the wintertime.
So going back to using Mosley as an example, medium-sized dog, 50 pounds, pound a day, how much should that cost me a month?
You should be able to feed him anywhere from $2 a day, with a rotation of 3 proteins, and this is going on the good side, the grocery store grade meat. You should be able to feed him anywhere from $2 to $2.50 a day. Okay. So you're feeding him chicken, it'll be $1.90, $2. You're feeding him beef, it's going to be a little bit more. It's going to be maybe $2.75 a pound, or give or take. But you're evening it out with the different things that you're feeding. So, chicken and turkey are usually the cheapest things you can feed.
So how many different types of food should you be rotating through? So if somebody's going to get a raw food diet and they're going to give their dog a variety of dietary inputs to your point, keep them.
That's a really great question.
Mm-hmm.
There is no limit. There is no cap. So the suggested minimum, and regardless of what kind of a diet you're feeding, is 3 to 5 different products, different proteins, if you will, fed in rotation, changing at least once a month. But you can feed as many different proteins as the dog will tolerate, as your budget will tolerate, as your time will tolerate, as your freezer will tolerate.
For sure.
And you should.
If you're, like, I do know a couple people who are into the whole game thing, and I think that actually makes a lot of sense, because anybody out there who hunts understands that a lot of the meat isn't desirable for human consumption, but it's still really high quality, very lean.
It's the best
meat.
Wild meat.
And it's organic.
It's the best.
And you don't have to pay extra for it.
It's
right?
not organic, it's wild, and there's a difference. So organic,
Sure.
That organic standard is
Okay.
something that
Talk to me
people
about
use
organic.
because it's a little bit, I think it's a little bit of a
branding
advertising shtick, and I come
to,
from an advertising
to up the
background.
price, right?
Yep, and to call it something that people will just assume this means this.
So
But
if
what
I have
organic could mean is you could have an organic beef.
Yeah.
So it's a cow that was fed organic corn
Mm-hmm.
and brought up to an organic standard, and it's now called organic. Well, guess what? A cow's not supposed to eat corn.
Right.
So that's not the same as a cow pasture raised.
So grass fed.
Right. Species appropriately fed. The same as what we're suggesting here. Species appropriately fed.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that the problem with feeding the same thing over, and sorry to interrupt you, but for feeding the same thing over and over again, is we think it's the same problem that happens with people.
Mm-hmm.
But we think that we can, and they can, develop allergies if they're fed the same thing over and over again. But the worst part about feeding the same thing over and over and over again, and it doesn't matter whether it's raw or kibble,
Mm-hmm.
the body becomes immune to the benefits if it keeps receiving the same thing over and over and over again. The body gets lazy. And that's not what food is supposed to be. Food is supposed to be fuel. Food is supposed to make the body work and work optimally and work harder.
Mm-hmm.
And the body isn't supposed to get lazy. So, a peanut butter and jam sandwich eaten every day is no longer the sum of its parts. It's a peanut butter and jam sandwich.
Yeah, and their sensitivity to, if they're on a regular diet, meaning they eat the same thing all the time, they're extremely sensitive to any variations. Mm-hmm.
There's things that you can feed that, you're almost guaranteed to succeed. Especially to start with, if the dog's not used to things.
Mm-hmm.
There's ways of introducing new food that, if your dog has a little bit of an issue, you can go a little slower rather than feeding them a whole steak. Maybe feed them a piece of the steak over the next 3 or 4 days, and you'll probably be fine. The smaller the portion, the less likely you're going to have the big mess. But
right.
The other thing about that is I do believe unless the animal has a huge intolerance for, cannot eat that food, you might just have to go a little bit slower anytime you introduce something new. Yeah.
Gradually change their diet over.
And it's worth it. It's worth it to feed them more things, even if you have to introduce them slowly like that. You don't have to do it for forever. You just need to do it as you're helping them build up their digestive system. And then there's supplements, and when I say supplements, I mean food. There's foods that you can use to help with the digestion of those things. Yeah,
that brings us on to another topic, which is supplements in general. It seems to be heavier on the raw food diet side than on the kibble side. And this is just observation. So I've noticed that some dogs who are on raw food, they'll get a bunch of herbal supplements, vitamin supplements, and that kind of thing. Is that something that is a requirement, or is that something that you can deal with in terms of the raw food that you're actually getting?
So I believe whole food at its core, if it's the best of whole food.
So what you're saying is get raw food and then add whole food to it? Is that what you're saying?
No, I think that if you have a good whole raw diet to start, you can decide whether you need to or want to add supplements. And supplements are preventative or reactive, depending on what you're dealing with.
Okay.
I happen to do more supplements for my dogs than I do for myself, but I don't do it because I don't think that the food is whole. It's because I want my dogs to live forever. And I just want to...
Right. So it's like extra...
And what about if I do... Yeah, I want to do extra. I want to do extra.
Okay.
But whole food is whole food. And so supplements, when we talk about supplements, and I'll go back to a point I made earlier, supplements, in my mind, are whole food again. So they're whole food supplements. We talked about intensively farmed animals. Intensively farmed animals, if you're feeding a lot of poultry, you need to supplement omega-3. Mm-hmm. They need that fat. Mm-hmm. If you're feeding a lot of beef and it's grass-fed beef, you almost don't need to feed omega-3.
I don't think I will ever meet a single person, and I could be wrong, who feeds their dog grass-fed, free-range beef. Because I just don't know that many millionaires. Like, I don't know any rich people who could afford that luxury for their dog.
So understand that, again, this doesn't have to be an all-in or an all-out
Sure, you're just saying
solution.
Like that's the idea.
Yeah.
But
so
I would
the
imagine...
reason that you see a lot of fractionated and synthetic vitamins and minerals in kibble, so you think you're getting the balanced food. Because, oh, look, there's vitamin A and there's vitamin C. It's because they're not using real food and because all the nutrition was lost when they made the food, when they processed it. They have to put that stuff back in because it's not there.
Right.
But whole food has it. And the beauty of whole food is that vitamins and minerals either work together or they work against each other. And they are, so cofactors help them contribute to the desired result, the things that help them do what they need to do. But when they're in isolation, they don't work. So in a large dog, a lot of people might have heard that, oh, don't feed too much calcium to your large dog. Well, what they might not know is the reason that that came about is calcium as a supplement in commercial food. The numbers are exponential when you look at the ratios of what calcium is in a kibble. And you're thinking, oh, that's great. My dog's getting more calcium. Good. You know, I want my dog to get more calcium. But what it doesn't mean is that even though that percentage of calcium is higher than it might be in a raw diet, that calcium is bioavailable to the dog, that the dog can use that calcium.
Right.
So what can happen and what did happen and what does happen is, and calcium's a good example of it, calcium in an unnatural form in the food gets into a puppy's body, and especially in a large breed dog, and rather than the body knowing how to absorb and utilize that calcium, because there's not the cofactors that help it understand and resonate as what it is, it just deposits on the bones. Oh. So the body doesn't know how to use it, and it doesn't know how to excrete it either.
If you're going to supplement your dog's diet, whether it be kibble or raw, it should be done through whole food. So, for example, if you're looking to add calcium or something like that, look to add broccoli or
bones or an egg are like the two easiest things. Probably calcium. I love a dog with a bone. I think it's energetic for them. We think that it releases endorphins for them when they eat a bone. So it's physical, yeah. And it's a great source of calcium. And a bone happens to be, so I hear about people taking, oh, my dog's a big dog, or my dog's getting older and slowing down. My vet gave me glucosamine. Well, a bone is a natural source of glucosamine and chondroitin. Mm-hmm. And I would rather feed a whole food source of glucosamine and chondroitin than something that's in a pill form. I don't really know what's in it. I don't know how processed or not processed it is. And I'm not saying that you don't do that. I'd rather just start with food first because I do know what that is and I do know what's in there.
This is a very complex issue. And
it's fascinating.
It is really,
there's so many...
really interesting. But I'm also, to be frank, I'm confused as hell.
Really?
Yeah. So...
help me unconfuse you.
Yeah. No. I want to. So the thing is... okay, I'm going to give you an example. So and Erica, if you're watching this, Erica used to do this too. In an ideal world, you would make your own food for your dog.
Yep.
That way, you know definitively, 100%, and I do know other people who do this. And I think if you have the resources, if you have the time, the patience, the dedication that it takes. So
the freezer space.
Linda is another one of my real champions of this. She went from, so this person went from a very high quality kibble to purchasing raw, and she was unhappy with both. And both were causing problems. And then she went to, I'm going to make my own raw food.
Making your own raw food is the best possible route. You're in control of everything. Where it comes from, the standards it's raised with, how it's processed. The only downside, and I've made my own.
Oh, there's lots of downsides to it.
Well, the biggest downside is that ground bone. I think that bone powder, bone meal is not an option. And I think that bone was certainly missing from my dog's diet, and I'm sure there's lots of people making their own where it's missing. But that doesn't mean you can't do it. But what you do need to do, easily done, when you're making your own, understanding that you don't have the equipment to do the grinding of the bones, feed your dogs whole, raw, meaty bones. Make that part of their daily food.
Okay, not chicken bones, though.
Yeah, you can feed chicken bones. You can feed any kind of bone. Chicken bones are easily ground, so you can put those in the food if you want. You don't have to.
But not chicken bones that are unground, because they can get caught in their throat.
No, as long as they're not cooked, they should be fine. And you want to feed, when you're feeding bones, you want to size your bone to your dog's chewing ability and your dog's size. So I feed my dogs chicken necks. As long as it's not cooked, it should be safe, but you should always watch your pet no matter what they're eating, whether they're eating food, if they're eating a tennis ball, they're eating a bone.
Yeah, absolutely. You should always be there just in case that happens. So if somebody's going to go down this route, and let's say they're super ambitious and they have the resources and they have the freezer time or freezer space, and they want to go down this route, do you have any advice or tips for them? Like, can you, for example, go to the butcher and say, I want 10 pounds of ground up bone because I can't do it at home, but I want to include it in my raw food mix?
So most butchers don't have the equipment. The equipment, to be honest, the equipment to grind the bone is really expensive. So you're better off to get pieces of bone. You're better off to get a neck or a tail. I don't mean to be gross, but a neck or a tail or, those kind of things.
Not gross. We're talking about dogs. I mean, dogs.
I know, but some people are queasy.
No. Look, we're discussing dog nutrition. We're going to be discussing dog poop in a minute. This is going to be gross. This is the reality of the topic. What we're talking about is we love our dogs.
Absolutely, and I want them to thrive.
And we want them to have the best quality of life for the longest period of time. And if you have the time, and if you have the resources, and if you have the ambition to take this on, again, I do know literally only 2 people who have been that dedicated. Erica is one of them, and Erica, we talked about Erica before in previous podcasts, because Erica had a Doberman Pinscher that was, unfortunately, she was diagnosed with kidney disease very early on in her life. Like we're talking like 1.5 years, 2 years old. The vets all said, okay, this dog is not going to live very long. You got like 6 months. And Erica was so fiercely determined to save this dog's life. And it's really heartwarming.
It is heartwarming.
I mean, she ignored everybody's opinions. I shouldn't say ignored. She didn't accept the fact that her dog was going to die. And she went after it and did her own research.
She listened to what everybody had to say. She went and did her own research.
Yep.
And found her path.
And she made her own diet for her dog, who, by the way, surprised all the vets, surprised everybody else, and lived to almost 10 years old. All from the dedication, from the love And the absolute, like, Erica is one of those incredible people. She's got an incredible will. She's very smart. She's very talented. She's very driven. If she gets her mind set on something, and keep in mind, everybody was telling her that, your dog is done for. And I met
Erica, yeah.
You met Erica, and you were...
And she's a pioneer.
She is.
And she, her will and her determination were remarkable. And I believe that the fact that her dog Stella thrived and survived as long as she did and as well as she did is because of Erica's commitment to not trusting what everybody's telling her, to get all the information she could, to find her own path, and then make her own way. And I do believe it's a big part. Nutrition was a big part of it, I think.
It was a huge part. Yeah, it was a huge part because the issues that her dog had weren't, they weren't fixable. Like, there was no medical treatment, there was no surgery, there was nothing, there was no procedure that she could have done. I mean, her dog was doing dialysis and stuff like that, but there was nothing, so she had to look at alternative solutions to literally keep her dog alive and to provide a quality of life for that dog. And everybody had given up on Stella, and Erica it was just so determined that she was like, I'm gonna find a solution, and she did.
Yeah, and that dog, I never saw that dog looking sick. That dog, when I knew her, was a
beautiful,
healthy,
beautiful, gorgeous dog.
Lovely, lovely soul.
A lot of people would have given up on that dog, and a lot of people, unfortunately, choose the route of, well, I don't want my dog to suffer, or everybody's telling me that there's no hope, so...
Do you know what I think people do? I think people do things out of fear.
Yes.
So, and we talked about the power of a vet's influence earlier, but we don't always understand that the vet doesn't know anything more about nutrition probably than you do. So when your vet says, oh, you know what, your dog has kidney disease and you have to feed this kibble for the rest of its days, you're so overwhelmed by the diagnosis, by the outcome, by it's coming to an end, I can see an end, you're heartbroken. And you may not have the energy or the commitment or the will that Erica did to think, no, this can't be it. I gotta figure this out. And so what happens is sometimes we fall into a trap where we just trust someone to tell us what to do because we're lost. We're just heartbroken and we're lost.
Yeah, we're distraught. We're emotional. Yeah. We're looking for some reprieve.
But what we know for ourselves, and even in our own health, is when there's something wrong, we all have to eat. We all have to eat anyways, right? Why not eat to support the condition? And you will never find a doctor who is licensed for humans to tell you to eat a processed diet when you're not well. Ever.
Right.
Like, it just doesn't happen. So food is what got us here. It's just getting back to figuring out what are the foods that help and what are the foods that maybe aren't optimal in this situation. And it's just tweaking it, but it's real food. And you know what, when you're in control, and especially if you're making your own, you're totally in control of where your food is coming from, and you know exactly what's going into it, and whether you feed the raw meaty bones, whether you use ground bone, whatever you're doing, it's all you, and it's all from trial and error with your dog and how it's working. And I don't know about your neighborhood, but in my neighborhood, you can get there's farmers now. North of the city, and I know they're in the States because I know people. I've heard of people doing it for their children. That they want to know the farmer, they want to know where the animal is farmed, they want to know what conditions the animal is farmed under, and those are decisions you can make if you have the freezer space to sort of make your own and find your own way, and you can totally do it on your own. It is the best way to feed.
Wouldn't it be awesome? And now I'm an idea guy. I love ideas, and I'm very much about challenging people and and seeing if there is anybody out there watching the video or listening to the podcast who would take up the idea. What if there were a co-op of dog lovers who said, okay, look, we all want to provide this healthier nutrition. Mm-hmm. We all want to have a lot more say and control over what goes into our dog's food, but we lack the economies of scale. That's the biggest barrier, because if you're talking about an operation who makes raw food, mm-hmm. and like there's a lot of infrastructure, you're dealing with a lot of weight, there's a lot of stuff. You know, your voicemail says I might not hear the phone ringing because of the freezers. Yeah. Right? So it's not... And
freezers are expensive.
Yeah, they're hugely expensive. So think about like one person. So I'm thinking about like Erica, I'm thinking about Linda, who take the personal initiative to say, okay, I'm going to make my own food for my dog, and I'm going to go through the expense and the time. But now think if there was a co-op, meaning a group of people who all pitched in mm-hmm. to buy whatever equipment mm-hmm. Was needed, and who could buy them in bulk. So instead of buying, let's say instead of going to your butcher or the grocery store to buy your raw ingredients, which that's retail, so that is going to be, especially if you're in Toronto, it's mm-hmm. ridiculously expensive. Instead going like directly to the source and saying, okay, I want to buy half of a lamb or sheep or whatever.
That's what they do now. That's the story I was telling. So
that's what they do.
Yeah. And you used to be able to do it when I was a kid, and you can do it now again. And you can know your farmer, and you can buy a half side of a cow, a whole cow. You can share your cow with your neighbor. You can do all those things. Yeah, for sure. So the two things that would be bigger costs if you didn't have the facilities is the freezers, yeah, and the rent if you had a central location where you were making it. That's expensive in a city. Yeah. You're better off if you can do it outside of the city. Yeah. And the grinder. But, you know, again, getting around, even though I truly, if there's nothing else that comes out of this, I fervently believe bone is the most important ingredient. Bone. But you don't have to, so grinding bone equipment is crazy expensive. You could do it on smaller chickens. You can grind really easily, but anything other than that, you know, any of the small birds you can grind, rabbit you can grind, but any of the bigger stuff, you're going to have some issues. So feed those whole bones. Probably better for the dog to gnaw away at it anyways. Good for their teeth, good for their soul. But, so you can totally do it, but those are the only expenses, and you know what, that is the most controllable, visible, desirable way you can feed. And you talked earlier about people that are hunting. If you're hunting, that is the best meat you can feed your animal.
Right. So if you know somebody who has access to game, mm-hmm. that's ideal, because you're also doing them a favor in terms of
relieving them of the freezer space.
Well, I mean, let's be frank. If you're gonna hunt a deer or whatever, I'm not a hunter, so like I'm a city guy, like whatever. But and you're gonna butcher that animal for consumption, that's gonna take up a lot of room. Yeah. And so I know of people who hunt who, as soon as they hunt, they like give away here, like, you know. So if you can get access to that less than desirable human cuts of meat, maybe it's because they're too tough or they're too lean or whatever the case may be, that might be an ideal base.
So that is the foundation, even though it's not as well sourced. That is the foundation of the raw food industry. We are taking not me, but they are taking the products that people won't buy or won't use as much of, right, and they're making it into food for the animal. So that is one, and you know why dog food, kibble companies are using the waste from the food industry as well. They're using different things of it, but that, And even if you have a friend who hunts once a year and only catches that one deer once a year, it doesn't need to be all or nothing. Any real food and good food you can add to your diet or your dog's diet, especially your dog, it goes a long way.
Yeah. Okay. So if you were to give somebody like a really basic recipe for their own raw food, and okay, so maybe the co-op's a little too ambitious. Okay.
No. I think it's a great idea. You'll find people that'll pick that up.
Oh no, guys,
it's hard in the city, but
people don't like my ideas. Not yet.
Yeah,
they're
they
gonna.
will.
I don't care because I'm one of those people, right? I'm very resilient. So I remember going up to a former manager of mine and saying like, look, I'm going to come to you almost daily with ideas. And I don't care if you don't implement them all.
Yeah.
I don't have those types of expectations. But there's going to be the odd one that you're going to like.
Yeah.
And that's doable. And if there's one that hits, so I'll just keep, it's like dad jokes, right? Like you just keep throwing them out. Eventually somebody's going to laugh, right? So this is another idea. So one of the things I truly believe in is to be open-minded and to give things a try and make up your own mind. So I'm not sitting here saying, do this, don't do that. This is good. This is the devil. This is awesome. I'm not here to do that. I'm here to just say, give it a try. Open your mind. Do some research. Ask questions. Be curious. So if you were to say, okay, I want you to try raw food because you're skeptical. And I love skeptical people because I think it's healthy to be skeptical.
Absolutely.
And then prove it to yourself. Watch your dog. See how their energy levels are. See what their poops look like. Are they improving? Are they more energetic? And then make up your own mind for your dog whether it could be beneficial for them. So do you have a quick, simple recipe that somebody could try at home? And how long would you recommend they try it for before making a judgment as to the benefits?
So I wouldn't suggest, if you're new to it, trying to make it yourself. I'd suggest buying a product first. See what works, see what doesn't work, and then get into doing it for yourself if you want to do that. Because I think that, again, back to your point, is the best way to have the utmost control of what you're feeding your dogs. So try it with someone who's already, started. So the easiest things to feed your animal just to start out are a poultry, chicken, turkey, rabbit. They're the easiest to digest. Okay. You want a combination of meat, bone, and organ, and you for sure want the bone. Again, that's something that can be missing in some of the raw food products that are out there. You can, add some bone to it as best you can because they do need that bone. And give it a month or two and see. I don't even think you need to give them 2 months because honestly, back to where we started, where everything happens 7 times faster, you would be amazed in a day, in 2 days, in a week, how quickly things turn around for them. And it includes, just switching the diet. And then as the pet owner, you can decide whether it was enough of a change for you to pursue it, or maybe pursue it half the time, or maybe just do it sometimes. There's so many ways of going about getting your dog real whole food, that can suit you. You don't have to, you don't have to do what someone else says to do. You can pick your own way.
So go buy a pre-packaged raw food to start, and then go up. So let's say somebody's done that. Because I'm really keen on people trying this at home. Because I really I was considering doing it. I was going to do a YouTube video because this podcast is fairly new. I normally just make YouTube videos for dogs that are behavioral based. But I was going to do a YouTube video that was making your own raw food at home. And I did some research into it. And where I got stumped was on the bone. Because I was going to go talk to my local butcher at St. Lawrence Market and see if I could get access to pre-ground, like if he would grind it for me. If I would say, okay, I want to buy a bunch of chicken bones or whatever kind of bone, and I want it ground so I can take it home and make a bunch. Now, the other issue that I have is that I'm a single guy who lives in downtown Toronto in a condo and who only has so much freezer space.
Yeah.
So what do you do for those people who... Because I remember I took care of a couple dogs, and both of them were on raw food. Not literally, or sorry, not figuratively. Literally, I emptied my freezer just to keep enough food for these dogs for a week. And it was just like, I couldn't do this because I wouldn't have a freezer if that was the case. So what do you say to those people who are like, I just don't have the space, I need to buy kibble?
So when you don't have the space, there's a spectrum of space, and for people that feel the need to have kibble, maybe you do a combination of kibble and some raw. The commercial raw is well suited to an urban environment because it's ground, it's compact, it takes up less space than if we went the other route where you have the half cow in your freezer,
right, yeah.
Which takes up a lot of space and doesn't go very far. Yeah. So, that's the more difficult, thing. And that's why probably why the commercial raw has found a little bit of a niche. But if you wanted to feed, there are foods out there. I know of a brand in particular. It looks like kibble, but it's not kibble. It's whole food. It's lightly baked. It's air dried. It's nothing but if that manufacturer wants more vitamin C, she finds a whole food choice that has a lot of vitamin C in it and adds it to her food.
Right.
So there are products out there, and look for them because, that would be an alternative to kibble. It's not going through the extrusion process.
Right.
Food loses nutrition. It's fundamental to what we're talking about. Food, with every step of processing or cooking or heating or whatever we do, food loses nutrition. We know even for ourselves, eating raw food is better for us.
Right.
When we can. As humans, we can't eat a lot of things raw because our digestive systems are just not equipped to do so. But a dog doesn't have those same limitations and restrictions. So anything that we can feed them that is as processed as little as possible is the best for them.
Is the best.
So that, maybe a freeze-dried option. Freeze-dried can be really expensive, and freeze-dried often puts in the premix at the end as well because it knows that nutrition is lost from the process. But it's probably still a better choice than if you compare just generally food quality. Kibble is highly processed. Freeze-dried is less processed. Raw is, as unprocessed as you can get.
Yeah, except for the grinding and stuff.
Except for the grinding and stuff. And the grinding does do some stuff. And, there's some foods that, and some amino acids that don't do well with that grinding process. So, for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. If you want to try raw food, try something that's prepackaged. And then you can go to attempting making
try and figure out, from a commercial product, try and figure out what's working and what's not working. Try in that whole concept of feeding a rotation of proteins. Try and include some white meat and some red meat. Don't feed all one or the other if your dog will. Absolutely, if your dog will tolerate it. Most will. And then just figure out which of those ones are, and figure out, which are cost effective for you and which you like working with and which your dog loves best and how the poos look when they eat the things.
And what about food safety? So raw food diets, there's a lot of food safety issues that kibble doesn't have to deal with, which is part of the appeal. And I've done a bit of research, and it does make sense in terms of food handling isn't something that's widely discussed. So if we're talking about a frozen product and then you stick it in the microwave to defrost it. Yeah, okay. See that reaction? That's what I mean. But people do that.
Yeah,
I'm not going to name names, but I know people who have their dogs on raw food. I'll tell you the way I do it, which is I did research on it. So these were dogs that, not my dogs, but they had a raw food. diet. And they came over and they were in my care. So I did research on how to do it properly. So I took the raw food out of the freezer, put it in the fridge, let it defrost slowly. And then when it was defrosted, I washed the bowl first, put it in, washed the bowl after. It was a lot of work. I'm not going to lie.
Do you eat meat?
Of course I eat meat.
Okay, if you eat meat, dealing with raw food for them is virtually no different than how you deal with bringing raw meat and dealing with raw meat into your own home. I personally prefer, especially if you're feeding raw, that you feed it at room temperature. I think it's more bioavailable. Yeah. But I just think for the norm, I just think it makes more sense to let it rest a little bit at room temperature, come to room temperature, and then feed it.
Okay. What about afterwards? So are you supposed to wash their bowls afterwards?
Oh, now you're going to get me in trouble. There's...
I'm just asking.
I
I could be completely wrong. So the research that I did cited that because it's raw food, okay, and there are bacteria that can grow in the bowl before or after, like salmonella and stuff like that. So like they were basically saying, if you were to prepare a chicken breast on a surface, you would wash that surface, and it's the same for raw food. So if you have raw chicken, like in your dog's bowl, and they eat it, and then afterwards you should clean that bowl.
So there's two different discussions there. What's best for the dog and what's best for the human. If I'm putting raw chicken into the bowl, I'm putting it into the center of the bowl. The raw chicken isn't, I'm not touching it, and it's not going all over the bowl. A dog does better with a little bit of bacteria than with pristine, fresh food. It's one of the reasons why they eat garbage, why they eat dead things, why they eat feces, why they do things that seem unpleasant to us. And it's because they were mostly scavengers. So things would be usually on the decay, not on the fresh side.
That's interesting.
So we're trying to humanize them, and we're trying to take all of the things that they do well with from their environment, because we don't do well with bacteria. Okay. We're trying to sanitize. It's kind of like the overdoing the hand sanitizer thing.
It's a bit much.
Where, everybody's got to do what they feel best with. I'm not here to tell people what to do.
Sure.
But there is the theory that we're overdoing it, and that we need some bacteria to thrive and survive.
So your dog it can be okay for your dog, but can people get sick from the dog bowls and stuff like that?
Yeah, but you know what? I only touch the outside of the dish. I don't usually touch the inside.
Okay, so give the viewers some best practices in terms of raw food handling. So should they defrost it in the fridge overnight, and then let it get to room temperature?
For bacteria and salmonella and all those things, certainly the most recommended thing. I think that people should do what they feel most comfortable with. I don't care whether you thaw it in the fridge or you thaw it on the counter. I care what you're feeding your dog. So if thawing it in the fridge makes you more comfortable, thaw it in the fridge. If thawing it on the counter is what works best for you, thaw it on the counter. I think they're fine either way, as long as you're feeding them the best you can. But if you can, and the dog's dish is clean on the outside when you're touching it, maybe I wash my hands when I touch it, but I don't clean the dish every day. And when I do clean the dish, I try not to use the dishwasher, although I do sometimes. I try and use apple cider vinegar to clean it. And the idea is, if you can, if it works in your environment, and I'm not saying to be gross or stupid about it, but if there's a little bit of bacteria there, it's probably better for them. Taking bacteria out of their world is probably not a good idea.
Yeah, I don't think it's about taking it out. I think that it's about certain types of bacteria either getting past to the humans, because obviously the humans are handling the food. I mean, I did my best not to touch it. So I would take it out. I would, use the packaging to just not touch it.
But I use it the same way I do when I cook meat in my home. I wash my hands before and after.
Okay.
I don't put chicken on a plastic
So that's
thing,
what
you know?
I'm getting at is what's the proper food safety to not necessarily like to protect your dog, because your dog's freaking eating it, right? And to your point, like they eat some really nasty stuff if they have the chance, right? So I think it's more about food safety with raw food when it comes to the people side. So whether you have children or whether you're just on your own, so wash your hands before and after.
Just like you do with your own meat in your home.
Right. Wash any surfaces that
if you're
touches.
feeding bones, put down a blanket or a towel on top of their bed or somewhere cushy and let them go eat there. And then when they're done, take it and put it in the washing machine right away.
Okay.
Rinse out your packages if you're using commercial food. You know, try and get as much of the gook out as you can before you put it in the garbage. But just deal with it like you do real food. Be responsible like you are with real food.
Responsible. Okay. Now, this is going to be a bit controversial because I'm sure there's a lot of vegetarians and vegans out there. But could dogs survive on a vegetarian or vegan diet?
That is really controversial. Thanks for putting me out there.
I can edit it out. Do you want me to edit it out?
No, I'll answer and you can decide.
Okay, how about this? How about this? Let's be politically correct. Okay, so I'll retract that question. Let people make up their own mind. And let's put it this way. I make vegetarian and vegan treats for my dog. So one thing that we haven't talked about yet that I did want to talk about, and there's still a couple things that I want to discuss, and I apologize to people if we got too deep into the raw and kibble discussion. It's a big topic.
Cut it out.
Right? No, I don't want to cut it all out. It's gold stuff. Like, that's what people are really interested in. There's a lot of controversy about it.
Treats can be really expensive. You know, if you wanted to, we were talking earlier about treats and making treats. If you wanted to do your own thing, buy a dehydrator and dehydrate some organs. They're not expensive. They'll be way cheaper than buying them in a store.
Yeah.
And if that's what you want to do, do that. You could do that with your fruit and veg as well. But I think that fruit and veg as a treat, I think I would probably, you know, when you're trying to consider everything that's going on with food and food sources and stuff, I think that that's probably a responsible way to go if you're just trying to give your dog a little token or a gesture of love and you're not so worried about nutrition. Don't do too much of the same thing because you're maybe going to create an imbalance if you do too much of the same thing. So don't always feed carrots. Don't always feed broccoli. Mix it up just like you do with your food, just like you do with everything. Supplements should be mixed up. Everything should be mixed up. But I'm going to answer the vegetarian thing because I come at it from a really unique perspective.
Okay, I let you off the hook.
And you can cut it out, you did, or not. But here's where I come at it from. So for 13 years, I tried to do it. And even though I know food and even though I can cook, I couldn't do it well for myself. Unfortunately, even though I don't love the taste of meat, I feel better when I eat meat and when I eat a vegetable. I don't do well with carbs. This is a body by carbs. I love carbs, but I don't do well with them. And I think that, you know, I tried for 13 years. I had to come back. I had to adjust. It's what makes me believe that if I couldn't do it for myself, when I had free choice, free will, you know, some sense of knowledge, how can we possibly do it for them? So I would suggest if you're starting on a raw diet, I would suggest no fruit and veg in the diet.
Really?
Yep. Just do the meat. Get your meat, figure out your meats that work, and then if you want to introduce fruit and veg because you have an opinion one way or the other, the strongest opinion to fruit and veg is that, you know, meat isn't farmed well, so it's not as nutritious as it was, blah, blah, blah. You could add some in, but what people, when they ask me in the store what I do or what I tell people, is if you're going to make a mistake on too little fruit and veg, not too much. It should not be an overwhelming part of their diet. So I think if you're feeding your dog fruit and veg, you know, whole, I think it's a nice gesture. I think it's giving them something, but it's not nutrition for them. If you're trying to give them the nutrition from the fruit and veg, what I love to tell people, if you think that's an important part of the diet and you're juicing for yourself, juice for your dog.
That leads to one of the Instagram questions. So for those who don't know, what I tried to do, or no, not what I tried to do. I actually freaking do it. It's just not too many people catch on to it. Is so before I have a guest on the podcast, I will post on Instagram saying, so-and-so guest is coming on. So if you want to submit questions for this guest, we'll do our very best to answer them. And one of the questions was around people food. So your leftovers. So I've had dinner, I had some Swiss chalet, I got some stuff left over on my plate. Might as well just give it to my dog and look at how they enjoy, whatever. Or I've even seen people who use their dogs, and I'm not kidding, as a pre-wash in their dishwasher. So, yeah, I'm not kidding. I'm literally not kidding. I really wish I was. So they will put the dishes in the dishwasher, and they think it's very cute, and they'll let their dog lick the dishes as a pre-wash. So literally, instead of rinsing them off, they will say, okay, go ahead, Fido. And their dogs will lick the plates clean with whatever they were eating for dinner. And then they'll put it in the dishwasher. Or they'll just have some leftovers from dinner. And again, whatever it was they're eating, whether it be gravy or potatoes or pasta or whatever the thing is. And their dogs will obviously eat it. And I always get horrified when I hear those stories because I don't think that's healthy for them. But people have this vision of, well, why should I waste this food, throw it in the garbage or whatever the case may be, when my dog is more than happy to eat it?
So I think you need to apply some common sense there, for sure. But what I will say is dogs evolved to eat our leftovers and our table scraps. We didn't have the variety that we have right now. And there are certainly, even in the human food chain, choices that we're making that are not optimal for us and not optimal for them. So I would be careful about some of those things. I always try and think, what would my dog eat? And...
well, if your dog is on a raw food diet...
If my dog doesn't eat rice and could never possibly, on their own, acquire rice as part of their diet, it wouldn't be something I would go out of my way to feed them. Again, I'm not saying I haven't. If there's been leftover rice in the fridge and I had some, I wouldn't feed a lot of it, but I would feed some of it.
Some of it, okay.
But there's things that you wouldn't feed, and Christmas time is a time where a lot of dogs get bouts of pancreatitis, and pancreatitis it's not caused by fat, but an attack can be brought on by too much fat. So they're feeding gravies or they're feeding things like that. Right. Really rich foods that a dog who, is normally on a kibble diet, same thing every day, year over year, and they're suddenly, through love and through wanting to, share in the joy with the dog, but it's not necessarily the best thing to do.
Let's be frank. When I talk to people about giving dogs treats in whatever form, what I do is I tell them to own it, meaning I tell them to be self-aware. So to understand that the reason why you're giving your dog a treat is because it makes you feel good.
Absolutely.
Not because your dog needs to have a treat, not because they're not getting enough to eat. Dogs are hungry all the time.
Absolutely.
I mean, Kenzie, I could wake her up at 3 o'clock in the morning, shove some food in her face, and she would be the happiest dog in the world. And it's just one of those things where they enjoy themselves, and when they get something different, they get really excited. But at the same time, you just need to acknowledge that you're really doing it for yourself, because it makes you happy to see your dog enjoying themselves, and personally what a treat means to you. So let's say you get, a chocolate bar or some ice cream after, you're just like, ooh, this is like a treat. This is something like special, and it makes me feel really good. So you transfer that to your dog. So what I tell people is look, if you're going to give your dog a treat, make them yourself. So to your point, dehydrated meats are my favorite. That's what I like to do. But sometimes I'll give them some melon or something like that. But it's one of those things where I would advise people to not use their dogs as garbage disposals. Yeah, so there you go. I actually do know one person who will remain anonymous. I'm not going to out them. Who does have curry once in a while for herself, and she does give her dog a bit of curry. And I was like, look, if it's a little bit, and it doesn't make their asses explode, like, you know, go for it. Like, it's probably not going to hurt them, but I would avoid it myself.
I would too. It's not something...
That's something I would say, okay.
Again,
maybe,
just like the rice analogy, I look for what would they be eating? Would they be going and eating curry on their own? Probably not.
No.
Because curry's a mix of things.
Sure.
They certainly shouldn't be eating onions, so if you've got something with onion in it, they shouldn't be getting that. I don't believe that they should be getting nuts or very much in the way of nuts. There are some people that do feed nuts. Like, there's a whole, and everybody's going to have their different opinions, but the safest thing to do is, if you're not sure and you're hearing all this different divergent opinions, just go with what they would naturally eat if they didn't have us here.
Right. Okay. All right. Now, that does bring up one last myth. Or maybe it's not a myth. I don't know. But I got a call from one of my friends who was in a state of panic. And it was about like midnight. And I was like, what's wrong? She's like, my dog just ate a chocolate bar. Is he going to die? Do I need to rush him to the hospital? Like, she was literally like,
I get it,
in a state of panic. And I'm like, okay, first off, what kind of chocolate bar? Like, whatever. Like, was it like 2 pounds of chocolate? Like, what was it? She's like, no, it was just like a regular sized chocolate bar. And I was like, okay, well, he's not going to die. But people are completely fanatical about this notion of, like, dogs get, like, killed, murdered from eating a bit of chocolate, and it's just not the case. Like,
well, do you know what the saving grace is that it's not real chocolate in our chocolate bars.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So if it's not real chocolate, they're probably fine, and it also depends on how far down the digestive tract it is.
So what if they, like, eat it?
If they've eaten it and it's been there for a while and it's real chocolate, there's nothing even a vet could do, even if you got the dog.
So they're literally going to die?
They can, yeah, if it's real chocolate. So there's not a lot of real chocolate things out there.
What is real
pure cocoa. And most chocolate bars are not real. There's maybe carob in there. There's maybe other things.
Well, I think the highest percentage I've ever seen is 85% cocoa.
Right, and that would probably be a problem for a dog.
But would it kill it? Would a dog die?
It can, yes. But do we know, how far along it is and you got the dog to the vet? But here's what I will tell you. So I can't say for sure the size of the dog, how quickly they digested it, how much cocoa. There's a whole bunch of factors there. But what I can say is what I do when I'm faced with that situation is I know how to make my dogs throw up. And so what I do is if I have a dog who's eaten something and I'm not sure what's going on or they're just acting kind of weird, I try and make them throw up. And what you can do to make them throw up, of course, there's charcoal that you can use. I don't usually have that on hand, but what I do have on hand is salt. Now, you have to be careful with salt, but dogs tolerate salt. And you want to be, if you wanted to make one of your dogs throw up, you would want to be downstairs on the ground level by the door because you don't have time to get them downstairs. It's that quick. So for a 50-pound dog, I'd probably do just under a teaspoon. A
little bit of salt. If they eat something they shouldn't, and they'll puke it up.
Or you're worried. And you just want them to puke it up because you're not quite sure what just happened. Yeah.
What about grapes?
Grapes and raisins can cause kidney issues.
I don't know anybody who feeds their dog grapes. I mean, grapes are really sweet. No, but they can get up on the counter. They can get up on the counter.
Oh, my dogs. I know two. I have a customer who's 2 dogs, 2 big dogs, got up on the counter. Both got into the grapes. I don't keep grapes and raisins in my home just for this reason. All
right, so I think our final piece of advice to anybody watching this, and hopefully we provided a little bit of clarity, is, and here's the things that I got from it, is add more variety. Even if your dog is on kibble, you can supplement some, maybe buy some raw food. So you can mix. So that's another thing that I heard, that people were adamant that if you have raw, you can't mix it with anything that's cooked or like kibble.
So here's the thing. They do digest differently, for sure.
Yeah.
The kibble is a slow burn, and you know, that's not optimal for a dog's digestive system. But if you are feeding kibble, we do not think anymore. I mean, I've always suggested to people, if you're introducing it and you want to go slow, mix the two together in the same meal.
Right. Okay. So add some variety to your dog's diet. If you're going to make something for your dog, probably the best bet is just to make them treats. So buy some meat that's on sale.
Absolutely.
Cut it thinly. Bones, but uncooked bones, right?
Uncooked bones.
Uncooked bones.
Unless you're making bone broth.
Unless you're making bone broth. Then you can give them cooked bones?
Oh, then you give them the bone broth, which is an absolutely healthful, wonderful thing to feed. Slow cook the bones, 24 to 48 hours. Joint bones are best.
Right.
Great source of glucosamine, chondroitin, collagen. Get it good and gelatinous and add it to the food. Wonderful thing to feed.
Okay.
Good for sick dogs, good for healthy dogs, good for everybody.
Okay, I didn't know. That's great. Otherwise, if you want to do some treats, buy some, whatever, maybe an undesirable cut of beef or pork or whatever's on sale. Cut it thinly, put it in your dehydrator, or in my case, my oven on low for very long periods of time. It's the same kind of thing. Yeah. And you can make your own treats for your dog. Much more economical.
Way more economical.
Much healthier. And it's going to be something that your dog is going to enjoy. So win-win. You get to give your dog a treat, but it's not the processed stuff that you get from the stores. And then if your dog has health issues, look to the diet to provide some relief to those health issues.
Health issues, behavioral issues, anxiety issues, everything starts with food. Everything. And you may not want to change the diet, but consider it as one of your protocols for turning things around. Yeah.
Look at it as an opportunity.
To help you.
To help you. I would say with raw food, one of the biggest benefits is that you can seek out more bespoke solutions for that food.
It's certainly easier to figure out what the issue is if there's an issue.
Right. Because there's less ingredients.
Allergies are usually 80% of the time they're environmental, they're not food. That doesn't mean that not feeding a real whole food diet. So if a dog has allergies, it doesn't mean that it's because of food. But what would likely help with the allergies is changing the diet. But if there are food allergies, the two biggest common ones are beef and chicken. So your friend in the building with the beef allergy, beef is the most common one.
Okay.
Chicken is the second most common.
Really? Try the raw food diet if you have the resources and if you have the space. Give it a shot and see how your dog reacts. It shouldn't take that long. And then make your own judgment. Like, make up your own mind. Don't listen to the hype. Don't listen to the naysayers. Don't listen to the corporations. Listen to yourself. Listen to what your dog is telling you.
And what makes sense to you.
What makes sense to you.
Everything you've heard and learned.
What you can afford.
Yeah.
And find a solution that works for you. Especially if your dog has any kind of health issues. I would definitely say that that's probably going to be your better option. And then in terms of what's going to work long term for you, just see what works. Like for me, in a condo, I don't have the space, but I know a lot of people are delivering raw food these days. You deliver?
I do.
You want to plug your shop? I can do this thing.
You can plug my shop?
I can definitely plug your shop.
No.
Watch, it's going to be magic. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Bam.
Barkside Bistro.
And there it is. Barkside Bistro.
Absolutely.
And you're located where?
We have one location at Leslie and Gerard. And we're just about to open a second location at Bathurst and Bloor.
Website is, watch this,
barksidebistro.com.
barksidebistro.com. Instagram is
Barkside Bistro.
This is really
Clever
easy
that way.
stuff. Okay, awesome. And you guys deliver?
And we deliver. And I have some tips. Good for raw feeders, good for not raw feeders.
Hit the tips.
The tips are, we didn't talk about water. Feed your dog filtered water. Do not feed your dog from the tap.
Filtered water.
Filtered water. Try and make sure it's a filter that filters out fluoride. We think that fluoride builds up in the bones. It can't be excreted, so it deposits. And we don't think it's good for humans, but we think it contributes to osteosarcoma in dogs.
Okay.
Remineralized water obviously would be the optimal. So a Brita filter doesn't filter out fluoride. A zero water filter does, and then you can go beyond that to a type of filter that remineralizes the water. But filtering water, if you make no other changes, filter the water.
Filter the water.
Filter the water. Don't feed from a plastic bowl. Feed from a glass bowl, a ceramic bowl.
Stainless steel.
If you have to use stainless steel, use stainless steel. One of the big ones is, we were talking about food. So if you want to stick to your commercial diet, we think that if you add leafy greens to your dog's diet 3 times a week, it will reduce their chances of, in a commercial diet, that it will reduce the chance of cancer in a pet that's fed commercially by 80%. That's huge.
Leafy greens, so like spinach,
Kale. Kelp is a great one.
Kelp.
Yeah.
Okay.
Spirulina, those are more supplements than food, but yeah.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. So, that would be something to do. Try and feed, some leftovers responsibly, reasonably.
I don't agree with that. I'm just going to say it. I get it and everything.
But it's different. There's different leftovers.
I respect your opinion.
What if you had leftover bacon in the fridge? You wouldn't feed it?
No.
Really?
Not that, like I made for myself?
Yeah.
No, because I put stuff on it or it'd be with other stuff. I just, and the other thing too is from a behavioral standpoint, it confuses your dog. So they start begging.
So you're talking cooked food as well and not necessarily raw food. So if you had a pack of bacon sitting in the fridge that you couldn't eat anymore because it was too far gone.
Oh, I might dehydrate it in the oven and make
but you could put
treats
it,
out of it.
well.
But I wouldn't make it for myself.
You could put it in their dish.
I just don't think it's a good idea.
You think that's still confusing? Yeah.
No, it's a behavioral issue. I'm just saying, like, it's more about avoiding problems.
I get it.
And it's unnecessary.
I totally agree with that.
Right? Because one thing I want to make sure people understand, when we're talking about dog nutrition, it's everything that your dog eats. So including things like grass, which we didn't get to, treats, their food, anything that they are given by the people throughout the day, that all is part of their diet. And when you're looking at their diet, you don't just look at, okay, well, I'm feeding them 1 pound of raw food a day. It's like I'm feeding them 1 pound of raw food per day, and I'm giving them these treats, and I'm giving them these
I agree with you.
scraps,
I see your point.
and
so
it's harder to moderate their diet.
Yeah, I just think in general, if you're feeding, because in the olden days when I was young, people used to feed the dogs the same thing they ate at their table, and I think that was a healthier diet than some of the choices that are out there today. But you do have to feed the same amount. You do have to.
Yeah,
I don't think it's perfectly balanced.
Try and keep scraps consistent. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Give it a try. Speak to your local dog nutritionist for some really good tips and advice if you're not sure, and seek out information. I think is the best advice we could give people. If somebody tells you one thing, take it with a grain of salt, whether it be your vet or your neighbor or somebody on social media. Go out there, do your own research, gather your own information, try things out, and see how your dog feels. And if your dog feels good, and if they look healthy, if they have a nice shiny coat and their poops are nice and everything is good, then there you go. Especially if your dog has health issues, definitely give it a shot. And to your point, if if you try raw food for a month and you just don't think it's worth it, then you can go back to what you're doing before.
Try some of those other things. Try adding some leafy greens. Try filtering the water. Try, you know, there's other things that you can do. Try putting some eggs in the dish.
Yeah. So instead of a definitive answer, what we're going to say is think about your dog's nutrition. And if you think about your dog's nutrition, odds are you're going to improve it in some shape or form.
Sure.
Whether it be changing to raw food or adding some whole foods instead of the pill supplements.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? Those are all really good things that are going to improve your dog's nutrition, regardless of what your personal beliefs are and what your personal choices are between raw food, kibble, dry aged, whatever.
And don't be scared of food and don't stress about it.
Yeah.
You know, if you're feeding a variety, you're probably doing well.
You probably do well. And there you go. So thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Did you have a good time?
I did.
Did you have fun?
I
It wasn't
did.
as nerve-wracking as possible.
Nope.
I really
I
appreciate
could
you.
keep going for hours
I
and
know.
hours.
Well, that's the point.
See?
Like, podcasts are supposed to be long format. So all you people complaining about how long these things are, this is what happens. It's a podcast. It's supposed to be long and an interesting conversation. And if you have any comments or if you want to ask some questions, I'll put your contact information in the description below. We always love to hear feedback from our viewers. So whether you have questions or comments, feel free to leave your opinion as long as it's done politely and respectfully. And we'll see you on the next Dogcast. Till next time, if you love your dog, take them for a walk. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye. Hey. That'll make it into the outtakes. Can't still be like that. Please don't be like that. Yeah, you're gonna be like that. Cruise ship.